This is the Birth, Baby, and Life podcast with Kristen Burgess, and we're going to boost fertility holistically in episode number 204. Hey mama, today we are going to talk about 7 steps to boost your fertility holistically. If you don't know me, my name is Kristen, and I am a pregnancy coach. I work with mamas all over the world, helping them to enjoy a healthy pregnancy, grow a healthy baby, and have a beautiful birth. I also work with mamas who are trying to conceive and mamas who are hoping to create an intentional and happy home full of their happy little ones. So with that, again, we're talking about fertility today. I talked a bit about quantum fertility in the last podcast episode, and today I want to talk with you about 7 basic steps. So this, like last week's podcast, is going to be a bit of a quick overview. I do a much deeper dive in the fertility course, but I want to get this out there because I do feel like we have so many women today who just aren't sure what to do if they want to boost their fertility, or they're told there's nothing really you can do. And I really feel like, based on my research, there's a lot that you can do to boost fertility. And even if ultimately you seek out the services of a reproductive endocrinologist or consult with a midwife who specializes in fertility, then you're going to be at a much better place if you've taken some steps, or at least started some steps, because in some cases you want to consult with those professionals right away. But if you've started some steps towards holistically boosting your fertility, like in the last episode, almost all of this is applicable to the men as well. Usually I'm talking about pregnancy and birth, and most of the pregnancy health stuff has to do with mamas. But when we're talking about preparing to conceive and conception, the man's health is very important as well. So these steps are good for both mama and daddy hopefuls out there. So with that, number 1 step is going to be understanding the basics of baby dancing, which is of course a euphemism for lovemaking or sex, with of course the intent purpose of getting pregnant. So how do you know when to baby dance? What do you do? I think a lot of couples have spent so long trying to prevent a pregnancy that thinking that you have to time or try intentionally to be pregnant is really a novel concept, because you've gone through your entire life thinking that if you weren't on birth control or using condoms or something like that, you were just going to get knocked up. And then you go off of that, or you stop using the condoms and you're like, why am I not getting knocked up? So it's good to understand some of the basics of fertility. And I think this is even more important if you've waited until you're older to try and conceive, because fertility does decline with age. And so understanding when you have the best chance to get pregnant is important. The first recommendation that I would make with this is to understand the basics of the menstrual cycle and how that works, but also to start tracking your own fertility signs. Because what happens is your cycle starts technically when you're bleeding, that's actually the end of the previous cycle. But in our modern nomenclature and thinking of things, it's a nice way to mark perhaps the beginning of a new cycle. So that's what we do. So the first day of your bleeding is the first day of a new cycle. And what that actually is, the shedding of the uterine lining that built up to sustain a pregnancy in your last cycle. So that happens for generally the first 4 to 7 days of your cycle. And while that's going on, hormonal levels are low, but they start to build. And they start to build until approximately 2 weeks into your cycle. So for most women, around day 14, though it's going to give or take some depending on your cycle. And those hormone levels, particularly luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and estrogen, are going to start peaking, especially luteinizing hormone, which is going to trigger ovulation, which is where your ovaries release an egg. And that egg travels from the ovary, it gets caught up in the fallopian tube, and it travels down into the uterus, where hopefully there are sperm who are waiting, or else the sperm often swim up to the fallopian tube to fertilize the egg. If fertilization happens, the egg travels the rest of the way down, the fertilized egg travels the rest of the way down the fallopian tube, and I won't talk about embryology now. Just know that developing baby is traveling down and will implant in the uterine lining, hopefully to grow with no problems. If the egg is not fertilized, then it just kind of floats down, and ultimately it's expelled at the next cycle when the period begins. And there's some other things that happen if fertilization has occurred that keeps your period from happening, that keeps the endometrium, which is the lining of the uterus, building up. And I won't go into detail on that. If you really want a deep dive into that, I do go over that in the fertility course. But having said that, that's the basics. So when you start tracking your fertility, you start at your period, and there are some signs that your body gives you, both signs that you can see without anything that can help you, and also signs that you can track with tools such as a basal body temperature thermometer, a BBT thermometer, and also ovulation test strips or a fertility monitor. Now, there is a lack of consensus in the world about what you should track and what you should track with. Pretty much everybody universally thinks that using ovulation predictor kit, which is a fancy way of saying a test strip that you either pee on or that you dip into a cup and you see if it gets a positive or not. So it's essentially works just like a pregnancy test, only it's to test for luteinizing hormone. So pretty much everybody agrees that you should use that except for the fertility monitor manufacturers. And they test for more hormones, often estrogen and LH, and sometimes other hormones, and that's all incorporated into their monitor. Some doctors will tell you, or midwives will tell you, to track basal body temperature. Others will tell you that it is a waste of time. Without those external monitors, you can track some things. You'll know when your period is happening, and you can also track your fertile fluids. Some women have great fertile fluid patterns, some women don't. Some women can improve those using some of the strategies that we'll talk about in the next steps. And then you can also check your cervix, which you can do just by the feel, but you could also visualize your cervix if you wanted to do that, which is much more than I can go into in this podcast episode. If you want my recommendation, what I recommend for clients is tracking temperature, tracking fertile fluids, the feel of your cervix if you want to, and then also using OPK's ovulation predictor kit strips. So mostly it's your fertile fluids, your OPK strips, and your basal body temperature. Basal body temperature confirms ovulation. It doesn't predict it. The OPKs will tell you approximately the window in which ovulation is going to happen. And then your temperature shifting upwards will confirm that that's occurred. And again, what goes into that is more than I can cover in the podcast, but it can be really helpful for you to chart your cycle for a few months. Number one, to confirm if ovulation is happening. And number two, to start to get to know your cycle. For example, I tend to ovulate on day 12 or 13, which is earlier than day 14. If I were trying to get pregnant and waited to baby dance until day 14, I would never get pregnant, because the egg has already been released and has already come down. It's viable for some 24 hours, so I would have missed the boat. So it's important to know that. And again, also, say you ovulate later, like on day 18, well, if you baby dance on day 14 or 15, it's possible you could get pregnant on day 18 because sperm can sometimes live that long, but it's also less possible. So knowing when in your cycle you are ovulating can be really helpful. Some women are like, well, I'll just make love all the time. And that's probably okay if your man doesn't seem to have any sperm problems, but sometimes, again, you can just miss the boat. So it's good to know when things are happening. And of course, this helps you to time that baby dancing. Timing intercourse is important. And you want to make sure that you're doing that enough. Like, you probably don't want just a one and done try. So tracking your cycle for a couple of times will let you know the range of days when you should really focus on that baby making action. Make sure that there's plenty of baby making action going on, and then have the best chance of pregnancy, and maybe not have to kind of go with that level of intensity. I'm trying to be a little bit discreet for family friendliness here, ladies. But yeah, that can really help. And another thing to remember too is that polarity is really potent. So that means maybe looking at some things that help you feel more feminine and enjoying yourself, like and things that help him to look forward to things. You know, basically, if the two of you are really enjoying it and feel very attracted to one another, then that seems to be helpful, because you're looking at good polarity there. And again, I won't go into too much because I'm trying to be discreet for a podcast you may be listening to in the car with your kids. So, okay, number 2 in the 7 steps to boost fertility holistically, let's try and say that 3 times fast, is optimal fertility diet. You know that it's Kristen, so this is going to come in there. So nutrient density is definitely the most important thing, and I would also argue that high protein is very important, but you want to make sure that what you eat matters. So eat foods that have a lot of nutrient density in them. Metabolic health is also absolutely essential, and this is something that goes, again, for both moms and dads. So insulin resistance is at the root of many of our modern disease problems, and every year we're just seeing more and more confirmation of that. So if you are eating a nutrient-dense diet that is tailored to help minimize or correct insulin resistance, you are much more likely to be fertile. This means favoring things like high protein, lean meats, or traditionally prepared fattier meat cuts. For example, Lily Nichols talks about having roasts and that sort of thing because you get glycine and a lot of other good nutrient content in there. And then lots of veggies, leafy greens, deep veggies, peppers, broccolis, local veggies that you get from the farmer's market, and less of the processed foods and less of the really heavy carbohydrate content. Lily Nichols just released a new book called Real Food for Fertility. I will, like I said last podcast episode, I said I'll try and get Nico Kennedy on, and I will also try and get Lily on. I've done 2 other podcasts with her in the past, which I will link below, but none since her new book came out. So anyways, Lily recommends that you look at your food like a plate, and so half of your plate is like those good non-starchy veggies, and then a quarter of your plate is protein, and a quarter of your plate is starchier veggies or carbs like sweet potato, or if you wanted to have rice or something, that one's going to be higher on the glycemic index. So that metabolic health is going to really help you. And there are some nuances to this. There are instances where I think that fasting when you're planning to conceive could be a good idea, especially if you're trying to rebalance your body and correct metabolic health. That's really nuanced. I talk about it a lot. I have a lot of handouts about it in the fertility course. But I will say that if you think you're going to try to conceive this month, I would not try and do any sort of intermittent fasting this month. But if you're still a few months out from trying to conceive and you're working on balancing and metabolic health, fasting could be an option. Feel free to reach out to me if you want more information about that. Tip number 3 is to optimize exercise or movement. Fitness is very important, but you should not wear yourself out. We know that when people exercise intensely, they can actually decrease their fertility. We know that lifting, strength training can be beneficial to fertility. It especially seems to be beneficial for men. But overall, overdoing it on exercise particularly seems to decrease female fertility. So I always recommend that clients incorporate movement, starting with walking, maybe some light body weight exercises or strength training. So you want to get that movement in, and you want to have some exercise in, ideally doing some walks in nature like we talked about in the last episode, but you don't want to overdo it. Some lifestyle considerations. This is tip number 4, and I kind of grouped this over addressing lifestyle considerations, and that would be things like your mental health is really important. I talked about a couple of episodes ago that women are really struggling with mental health in this day and age, and so doing some pondering and some journaling and some thinking and some working on that might be helpful for you from a trying to conceive perspective. We know that stress and trauma do impact fertility, so working with a therapist or doing some journaling or some workbooks or something to work through anything that you feel might be going on in your life can be really helpful. Hygiene can be important. Dr. Dittman from the Brighton Baby book believes that hygiene is really important to fertility. He recommends that especially you're looking into your oral hygiene, because we know that can not only impact fertility, but it also may impact rates of miscarriage, preterm birth, and that kind of thing. So pregnancy complications. So oral hygiene, but also your overall hygiene. I don't think that you need to scrub yourself overly much, but paying attention to oral hygiene, looking at any sexual health issues that you may have going on, and that sort of thing is good. If you've got yeast or any other imbalances, BV, chronic UTIs, anything like that, this is a good time to start addressing those things because they probably all indicate imbalance. Looking at occupations, this one sounds weird. Number 1, it's important because you want to look at your stress levels. If you're in a really stressful occupation, you may want to rethink and reconsider that or look at other options. And also, some occupations are shown to reduce levels of fertility. For example, men who are pilots or who are race cars or who are otherwise working in areas where there's lots of levels of high heat levels, those men can experience lesser fertility. People who are working third shift, night shift, may experience lower levels of fertility. And some occupations bring you into contact with a lot of chemicals that could be dangerous for your baby. And so those are things that you want to think about when you're looking at your occupation. Also, of course, things like drugs, alcohol, smoking, all of that is stuff that you probably want to phase out of your life as you're trying to conceive. Now, tip number 5 is having high quality eggs and sperm. This is especially important for those of you who are getting older as you're trying to conceive. So the first thing that you want to do is go back to the prior 4 tips because you want to optimize your health. And then you also want to look at mitochondrial function. So this is going back to what we talked about in the last episode where we were talking about really looking at health on that cellular level. We know that mitochondrial health is really tied to sperm and especially egg health. So when you're looking at that and addressing that quantum fertility, that quantum biology health perspective, that can help with mitochondrial function. That means spending time in nature, paying attention to your circadian rhythm, eating nourishing foods. Now, there are a lot of supplements that can help with sperm and egg health, and I do go over those in the full class. So reach out to me if you're interested in more on that. Age does matter, but I think that the research is fairly promising that you can go a long way if you're intentional. There may be other options that you need to explore, or you may want to see a specialist sooner rather than later. But there is a lot that you can do, especially when you look at your nutrition, when you look at your lifestyle, and when you're looking at that quantum biology health for you and your baby. So again, correcting for oxidative stress, some of the things that we talked about at the end of the last podcast episode can really help as well. Now, step 6 also revisits the quantum biology because it's about conceiving a vibrantly healthy baby. And I believe that this one is another holistic category. I grouped quite a bit of under it in the course because these tips are broken down in the order of the course. But so I start with relationships because you really want to look at relationships. And these are relationships all over the map. So it could be relationships with your parents, with your siblings, with your other family members, with your community. What support groups and structures do you have? Are you still with a group of people who are all single and you're like the first ones who are trying to have babies? Or are you starting to make community connections where you're seeing parents around? Now, I know if you're dealing with infertility or a delay in conception, that can be hard because it can just be hard to be around parents. But if you start to at least identify supports in the community so you know where those things are, maybe you're looking up midwives, maybe you're looking at when is baby story time at the library, when you're looking at perhaps where is the breastfeeding lactation consultant, breastfeeding support group at, looking at those sorts of things can just start to bring that into your, into your psyche and into your being intentional about looking around for those things and those opportunities. And it can start to shift from relationships that are focused perhaps on career or single adventures, bar hopping, travel, that sort of thing that may or may not be curtailed. Some people RV around with their kids. But just starting to take that shift from a single life to parenting and parenting decisions and that sort of thing, and those relationships, and looking at, do I need to heal relationships? Do I need to nurture relationships? Are there relationships that may need to end? Are there relationships that I need to establish? And of course, your relationship with your husband or your partner is going to be vitally important in this, and I would recommend that you do a lot of talking about the things that are coming up. What do you want pregnancy to look like? What are you envisioning for the birth? How will you raise your child? How will you address your child's schooling? What will discipline look like? All of these are things and discussions that you can have that help you guys start to hash things out and get on the same page, and can really start to open your mind and your heart and your life to a child. Also, I talk quite a bit in the course about genetics and epigenetics and that sort of thing. So understanding family health history and also understanding how the choices that we make now and during pregnancy can really impact our baby's health on an epigenetic level. And so I think just starting to honor those lifestyle choices and look at that and realize that you can make a big difference in giving your baby lifelong health. And this preconception period, like I said before, is just the right time to start that. Because think about it, in the first few months of pregnancy, the placenta is not on board, and really the placenta becomes active around the end of the first trimester, around week 12 or so. And so a lot of what your baby is going on is your own nutrient stores and your own what you have without it being processed through anything. So a lot of your baby's health in the early pregnancy period, especially because many women have food aversions and that sort of thing, is being established in this preconception time. And a lot of epigenetic switches are getting activated based on lifestyle health. So that's not to make things feel really heavy, or that you are like, oh my gosh, I have to make all the right decisions, because babies are quite resilient. But it's to give you this awareness that many of the choices that you make now will really be helpful for your baby. So this is a good time to build up. This is also the section where I talk about quantum health, which I talked about in the last podcast episode, so I won't repeat all of that. And again, just looking at parenting decisions, starting to make parenting decisions and that sort of thing is really important at this time. And then step 7 is considering holistic fertility supplements. I did mention those in the part, I think it was 5, about sperm and egg health, because there are definitely some supplements that have shown to help with that. And I also talk about basic fertility supplements. In fact, you can get my handout about basic fertility supplements for free. I will link to that below. But there are some supplements that go beyond the basic fertility supplements, including the sperm and egg health supplements, and also considering other supplements that may help to boost fertility or equalize your cycle, normalize your cycle. There's also considerations for you if you're coming off of birth control for a period of time to balance and rebalance. It may take you some time to get your cycle back or to get your cycle normalized. So there's a lot to look at. I also discuss in this section a lot more about OPKs and choosing to use those or not. I have used those both to conceive and also in doing some work for the class, and I will say that at first they felt a little confusing and frustrating, but then they started to make more sense. So I think it's good if you're going to use something like this to do the research, to try them out for a few cycles before the cycle that you will actually try to conceive. But yeah, it's just really important to look at supplements, to understand what they're used for, when they're used, to understand what to do if you're coming off of birth control. Birth control closes down or shuts down brain ovary communications, so it might take some time to reestablish that. And just going in and understanding that you don't necessarily have to take all the supplements right away. There are some basics like a good quality prenatal vitamin that you may want to take right away. But start with the other steps and then consider, do I want to layer in something else there? Because when you look at it, chances are when you're looking at nutrition, metabolic health, movement, quantum biology, circadian rhythms, and all of that, you've got quite a lot to occupy you for a month or two as you start to shift your lifestyle and make all of those changes. And if you don't find that you're conceiving easily after that, definitely look into some of those other things. So with that, I will wrap this episode up. If you're interested in the full course, I will have a link below to the Holistic Fertility Blueprint. I'll also put a link to the freebie, which is just the list of basic fertility supplements. And if you've got any questions or if you want one-on-one support for this, I do have openings for coaching clients right now. So I will put a link to my coaching page below as well, or you can reach out to me, Kristen at naturalbirthandbabycare.com. And I believe next week with the podcast episode, we are going to start a series on neurodiverse mamas and pregnancy, birth, breastfeeding, and mothering, which is something that I've been really looking forward to. So with that, I hope that you will have a blessed week, and I will talk to you next week.